Your hosts right now are Andreas Beckay and also
Nathaniel Smith.
And we are missing the third member of our team, Zach Talbot, but this is part of our innovation project for managing innovation with Dr. Jeremy Chambers. And today we have with us Pastor Andy McDonald, who pastored and transitioned from a large established church. And we're excited to have him share with us a little about his ministry and how they prepared for the transition, and what I think from the information I have was a successful and very intentionally crafted transition plan. So welcome, Pastor Andy. Maybe you can give us a few words of introduction about who you are, where you are right now, and then we'll begin with some questions.
Sure. I officially retired from denominational employ this past March, but from the WholeLife Church a year ago, I was able to have a year of severance at the end of my career, which was sort of nice. I grew up in the South. I pastored in Georgia and Tennessee before coming to Florida, and came here in 30.5 years ago, and last year it was, and just really I'd always believed that pastoring is really important and that I hated short-term ministry. And so ended up making sure I didn't have a short-term ministry by staying with my people. And my philosophy of pastoring has always been to really love your people and preach decent sermons. And they'll think you're an A+ if you can do B in both of those. So it's
fantastic.
I'm married to a wonderful woman. I have two grown kids and 3 grandkids.
Wonderful. And Pastor Andy, you are, like myself, coming from a Seventh-day Adventist tradition. But I think the lessons that we can learn from your transition go beyond denominational boundaries and can help any church, particularly established one, as they move from transitions of pastors. So tell us again the name of the church that you were in, where that was located, and how many years you were there before you started this transition.
Yeah, I came to the church in 1984, and it was called the Seventh-day Adventist Church at Florida Hospital. That was its official name. And we shortly thereafter changed the name to just Florida Hospital Seventh-day Adventist Church. Just before I ended my career, Florida Hospital became part of Advent Health into a national brand. And so they came actually and took the name Florida Hospital off of our building. We had to create a new name, and our new church name was WholeLife Seventh-day Adventist Church. And pretty much, even though we're denominationally affiliated, everybody would call it before just called a hospital church. Today they just call it WholeLife Church. Like I said, I came here in July 1st of '84. And ended my time at that church end of March 21.
Wonderful. And what were some of the core tenets for your ministry and for the church in terms of a mission and a vision for WholeLife Church?
We've always been a very, my ministry, at least when I came here, it was a senior citizens church. I came as a youth pastor when I first arrived. I was about 8 months the youth pastor, then became the senior pastor. But there were no youth here. It was a senior citizens church. We had a funeral a month for the first 3 years I was here. I was killing the church slowly. But transitioning it into a much younger church, much more multicultural in its makeup. A few years ago, we had one of our guest pastors that was there. He was doing the welcome of the hosts and kind of thing of the service, asked for people to stand up. If you were born in Europe, if you were born in Asia, if you were born, and he went around the world doing that. By the time he got to the United States, most of the congregation was standing. Large number of people born outside of our country. We had a large Russian population, a large population from Myanmar, from former Burma, as well as a lot of Hispanics, a huge number of Brazilians, just a real great variety of our congregation. And a very young congregation. I don't know what our median age was. I can't remember the statistics, but it's younger than the average Adventist church anyway, for sure. The philosophically, we actually had a mission statement years ago called "Because of the grace, acceptance, and salvation we find in Jesus Christ, Florida Hospital Church exists to build relationships between God and man," something like that. Way wordy. In 2000 and around 2008, 2009, I restructured our board, and we also revisited our mission statement. And our mission statement became loving people into lifelong friendship with God. And that was very intentional to do God versus Jesus. We have a number of people in our community at our hospital next door to us that were Islamic and other world religions. And by saying God, we felt like it kept us open to a larger number of people. So loving people into lifelong friendship with God has been the mission for a number of years now, probably at least since late 99 to early 2000s is when it came out. We had also had a large focus from influenced by Willow Creek Community Church back in the early 90s. We developed a service on Saturday night for 9 years. We did that every Saturday night for a seeker group. It actually was the largest growth period from a baptism standpoint that our church had seen. In the restructuring of our board, we went from a representative board to a policy governance board. I'll talk about that more in a little bit. But then we also, I took that board through trying to get them to come to a vision. And I wanted to rise from the board so that it would be the people's vision. And after about a year of doing that, I was tired. And so I finally said, I'm going to bring them something and let them react to it, and we can change it however they want to change it. I've got to bring them something. It's not going to rise from the people. And so our vision that we came eventually with much conversation and collaboration was Florida Hospital, WholeLife Church will be a church without walls, fully engaged in serving the people of our community. A church without walls, fully engaged in serving the people of our community. It was very difficult in leading that process to not let them be focused on us. I wanted the vision beyond us. And so it's not something about we're going to become this great church, or we're going to do this, or we're going to do that. We're simply going to be a church without walls, which means our church is distributed, fully engaged in serving the people of our community. And we defined during my ministry time, our community is the people within your circle of influence.
Right.
So it was not the community, we were talking about some kind of geographic region. It's simply for every member of the congregation to think about the people within their circle of influence was their community. And so those two things were really important, foundational, so that as we continue, the congregation would, and I really believe that even today, a year and a half later or whatever, we could probably go to the congregation, ask people, what's the mission of this church? And the vast majority could state it almost immediately. And the same thing with a vision. It's very much part of our new pastor, Ken Wetmore, has it on the wall of his office. He actually put a neat diagram on the wall. So it's been very central to who we are. Wow,
thank you. Now we're going to transition to asking you some questions about your transition. We're going to transition to your succession. So you were there, you led them through being a church that was having a funeral a month and you were killing the church, to transitioning the church to having a different structure in terms of the board and becoming clearer in terms of your mission and your vision. And so we're going to assume that you had just 36 years of unparalleled success. You had no problems. You walked on water. It was perfect, right?
Yeah.
But then at some point, you got to the stage where you realized, hey, you know what? I need to start thinking about what it's going to look like for me when I transition out, to figure out a succession plan. How did that come about? And what were those conversations like with your church when you got to that stage? And Nate, we have the sample podcast questions, so feel free at any time to start pulling questions out as well. Yeah.
Well, it's you can't do the part that I was trying to balance was I don't want to talk about it too early. I don't want to be a lame duck, and I don't want to talk about it too late and wish I had gotten it done better. And so that was the real tricky balance point. What helped is my long term having been there, nobody saw me as leaving to go somewhere else, and so that I could sort of rest in that assurance that I wasn't going to do something else before I retired. I was going to retire from this congregation. And so I began to talk about it a little bit. Well, the first thing I did, and this was, whatever 2009 is from where we are, where it happened, 2021. So yeah, 11 years ahead. I said, man, to make a transition, one of the things I think is really critical within our denomination is to have a strong board, because I know it's done different places, different ways, but within Adventism, it's very much controlled oftentimes by the conference making the decisions, and we didn't want anything imposed upon the congregation. One of the things we were concerned about is losing the culture. We know things are going to change with a new leader. We're all cool with that. I talked about that very plainly with the people. Things transition, we'll go in new directions. But what is it that we went in our renaming process, which was really nice that this sort of paralleled my retirement. We went through a whole process of who are we and self-identity and trying to really get clarity on the things we really want to hold on to as who we are, and what are we willing to let go of. And that was all about name change, which was really helpful in creating the document for the potential replacements of me. But I'd say that the very first thing I did in my thinking about the transition, before I mentioned it to any of our members, not talking about it, just knowing in my head this board issue, and that was to move the church board from a representative board to a policy governance board. Usually our church boards within our framework are representative boards. You have people from all these different departments representing those departments, sort of like senators representing their states and fighting for their little turf areas. And I just never cared for that. I had some very ineffective boards over the years, times when we just went for like months and months with no boards. And so when I really said, we got to have a strong board that can have power, but at the same time is not meddlesome. And so I began to read the works of John Carver about boards that make a difference and that kind of thing, and how to move to boards that are not meddlesome, but are strong in their support of the leadership. So we run on a very corporate model. We did at our church. I was like the CEO. I answered to the board. The board, the rest of the staff answered to me. They would attend. When we restructured to a representative board, we created a board governance policy manual with executive limitations and board governance models and all this kind of document to keep us in line. And the main thing all the board was supposed to do is talk about what do we want to do for whom at what cost. They weren't supposed to they didn't talk about the buildings unless the building was part of what do we want to do for whom at what cost. They didn't talk about colors of carpet or what the paint should look like or who's going to mow the lawn or repair things. And that was never not board conversations. Occasionally they would want to go there, and we would have to just gracefully bring them back and say, that's really not a board issue. That's a management issue of the church. And let's talk about what do we want to do for whom at what cost. And so during this point, our treasurer was not even on our board. It was that kind of a truly people serving on the board were serving. That was their church office to serve on the board kind of thing. Yes. They had gifts of governance.
So Andy, let me just jump in to clarify something. It seems to me that whatever was successful in your transition was because you had restructured the board and had the board in a place that they could listen and help make that transition go well.
That was really critical to the transition process. It really was, because they saw themselves now as having authority for the church, and they also understood our more corporate model as opposed to some kind of a more churchy model, and so that made a difference in the process of who would be the next leader, because that responsibility they understood had oversight of the whole staff and the program. So it was important for them. They having the strong leadership in the board. I had former, since we're right by the hospital, I had former hospital administrators who was my board chairman. That we had great connections with that group. And we started out with a 9-member board. In fact, the former leader of Advent Health, Tom Werner, was my first board chairman under this new model. And then we started with 9-member board. We went from a 9-member board. Eventually, I think they're up to 15 now, and I don't think it'll get any larger than that. The part of that board process. What was I going to tell you? Telling the board.
Hey, listen, while you remember that, one thing I've realized I never asked you is, what is the size of WholeLife Church? We never mentioned.
Okay. Yeah, when I got there, we had about 200 in attendance. The membership was probably 550 or something. Over the years, it transitions to the membership was around 1,200, and our attendance was about, I'd say we had about 800 a week when I was in my ministry.
Okay, and what was the yearly budget for the congregation?
Our local budget was right at $1 million or a little over, and our tithe base for denominational support was about 1.5 million, I think, like that. We worked hard over the years to help people understand that tithing is a biblical concept and how it's used as an organizational decision. Anyway.
So you mentioned the board and how it had to restructure and really shift its focus from carpets and paint to more decisions on how are we going to help this person and what are we going to give them, and putting more management back into the staff, onto the lead pastor and the staff. What role, when it came to succession, what role was the board's? Was the board the hiring committee, that were they the ones that did the search and interviewed, and what was their role versus the staff? And I'd have to say versus I think you said the conference is what would normally play a big role into it, but it seems like you guys tried to pull that back more to the church. So how did that dynamic work out? What was the role of the board versus the staff and the conference?
Yeah, we didn't think the staff should have a whole lot of say in the process for hiring their boss. We didn't think that was a smart move. So they were not on the search committee. The search committee, the board, what the board's function is that they elected and supported a very great, lots of variety of people, age and ethnicities and backgrounds and education models. Great search committee, and then supported that search committee fully in what they would do. The search committee then went to work, and our board chairman and I went and met with our conference leadership, the ministerial director for the conference, who would normally drive the search process and the replacement of pastors, and asked if we might have permission. We were trying to be very cooperative. Asked permission to hire a search firm, and the search firm that had already worked with some of our denominational entities. They had done a couple of our college president selections within the denomination, so the people were familiar with this search firm. They'd done a lot of work for the health system, and so he said yes. Maybe in a weak moment, but he said yes, trying to be cooperative, with the caveat that he would be part of the search committee. And we said, well, that'd be fine. We figured I think the search committee had about 12 or 14 people on it. So we figured we could probably neutralize him if necessary. So said, yeah, come on. Come aboard. And the reality is that he got quite a bit of heat from his administration when they discovered that he had approved our hiring an outside search firm.
Wow.
But it had already been agreed upon, and we already had a contract by that point, which we acted upon immediately. And so we spent about $40,000 with the search firm to work for looking for my replacement. Again, we had just completed this renaming of our church process, and that renaming had created these documents and this picture of who we were really well. We had gone through an extensive process. We were able to utilize the hospital system's marketing and PR department, and they did some phenomenal work for us as we took different names to them, and they created different looks of these different names, and then we eventually brought it to the congregation. I won't talk about the disasters that almost happened anyway.
Well, I mean, you could, because one of the questions we have here is, what went well and what do you wish you could have improved on? So maybe that would come under that category. And Nate, I cut you off. Maybe you wanted to sustain this line of questioning.
No, I think that's a great place to go, because it may incorporate that, but it doesn't have to. With this transition process, what went well? What do you wish you could have improved on?
Sure. Well, we had outlined a process that was very specific. We had dates already sort of set on the thing, that we were dealing with all this in the end of the year and the beginning of a new year. And our plan was to try to have a new senior pastor on staff by early June. And the plan was that that person would come and we would work together from June to December. And then I would fade away from December to March, probably start fading away actually in October even. But the idea was to work together so we could have as smooth a transition as possible. The handoff. I'm not a very controlling person, and I wanted to be able to, but I want to be able to speak into it. And so looking back at the transition has gone exceptionally well. Ken did a great job as he stepped into the pulpit. His first sermon in the series was about our vision and our mission, and how much he affirmed them and preached right through them, and just did a great job. But as I've watched him over the first year of his ministry here, I think it could have even been I think it got an A. I think it could have gotten an A++ if we had had a chance to work together for a little while. Because there's more about culture, and more about, I would have had the chance to challenge him about, no, just please don't say it that way. Just little things that, we've worked really, really hard for, 30 plus years to not have overly churchy language. To try to use common vernacular. Within every group, there's all this insider's language, and we try to make sure we define insider terms. Like, for instance, our schools are our boarding schools. We'll know by their initials, like FLA and GCA and MBA and what And so, in our church during my time there, we no one would ever get up and just simply say something about FLA. They would say at Forest Lake Academy, a boarding school or a day school for high school students, they would explain the terms. And so some of that you have to grow into. And but anyway, I think Ken's done an excellent job. But I do believe if the conference had allowed us to follow our plan fully, it would have even been a better transition for him and for everybody.
That's great. I love that the fact that you guys built in that time of overlap is really great. And you say you wish it would have been a little bit longer to work together.
No, it never happened.
Oh, no.
No, the conference wouldn't let it happen. The conference insisted that I step aside before Ken comes. So it was all Ken's when he got here. Now, Ken and I talked, we met and talked, but it was not official. We weren't working together. We weren't, and for the congregation, it was sort of tough because they've been dealing with me for years, and maybe some of them for their whole spiritual walk,
Wow.
And now all of a sudden I retire, and I don't just retire, I disappear.
Yeah.
Because the conference didn't want me to attend that church for a year. And so I honored that. And since they were sending me a paycheck, I was going to honor it for sure.
So what with, if you were to lay out a timeline with what the plan was, the transition plan on a timeline, the ideal plan versus what you guys had to work with, what happened there? Could you lay out the ideal and then let us also know what the difference was with the actual?
Sure. Our laid out plan was for about a 6-month overlap, somewhere between 4 to 6 months.
Yeah.
And the conference said there will be no overlap, period. Yeah. And so we did all we could do in the handoff as carefully as we could. Like I say, I met with Ken when he came and interviewed for his job, and we had conversations, and then we had conversations occasionally throughout the year. But it was very different than speaking into it. The reason I had this idea is I had watched the transition of Jim Henry. Jim Henry was the president of the Southern Baptist Association and the pastor of the largest church in town, First Baptist Orlando. Okay. And he was there for like 25 years or longer, and just very well loved and an excellent leader. Yeah. And he knew he was done, and put together a transition plan where he and David Ute, who replaced him, worked together, overlapped, and it was the most wonderful, seamless transition I'd ever seen in business or ministry. It was like this guy sort of joined the team, and all of a sudden Jim Henry's doing less, and pretty soon Jim Henry's gone and David Ute's in charge, and it was just. It just really seemed to be gracious to the people. And I think that one of the things that's really critical in thinking about transitions is what's best for the people of that congregation.
That's great.
Too oftentimes we think about what's best for the leaders or what's best for the organization. What's best for the people of that congregation?
Yeah.
And my ending and stepping into a year of severance was because the search committee, the leader of the search committee, helped step in and help make that happen. Or I would have been fired and gone to war with the conference, which I thought would have been terrible for the church people.
Exactly.
My Scottish nature is to get a club and go to war. But I believe that for me to graciously back out and say, the conference has enabled me to have an early retirement, and you knew I was retiring anyway, and this is just a really great gift for me, and Ken's going to do a wonderful job, and we've done a great job with the search committee finding him, and to do that in a cooperative, gracious manner, I think was best for our people. I wish for a little something different for the conference leadership, but that didn't happen. So,
So that's, and I'm sorry, Andreas, I keep on jumping.
Oh, no, please.
One more question along these lines, because you mentioned, what's best for the people, and I think that's something, especially within church transition, we need to have greater consideration for than even within a lot of businesses. It's not like they're employees where, they're expected to show up just because they're employees, right? Where they're on the paycheck. We need to walk them through the process as well. So about how long before the transition kicked in or the search started, I would say, how long before that was the church made aware that you were moving towards retirement? Like that it was not, this is going to happen sometime in the future, but hey, this is coming within the next year or so. And then same thing with the board.
Just because as a person ages, everybody starts asking, how much longer are you going to work? And when are you going to retire? We have to put up with you forever. And so I would get lots of questions. And prior to our deciding, I could say on very honest way, we've thought about it, but we haven't decided anything yet, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then probably almost a year out, the board, we started having very serious discussions with the board. This is coming, and we want to do this well. And so, and again, we didn't have specific dates in our minds as much, because we knew we had to work with the conference and what was that going to look like, and as well. But the congregation both heard that I was retiring, and because I said those words, but it didn't quite all that knowledge didn't quite enter their heads as fully as it could have. It's like, well, yeah, sure, he's going to retire someday, but and then it got sped up, because toward the end of January of 21 is when we made the transition that said by March 31st I will have retired from the church.
Yeah.
And so at that point we had a quarter, and we began to hustle, and then I did my last 4 sermons of things to remember, basically after I'm gone, 4 things to remember, and we stepped down to those, and then they had a wonderful, marvelous celebration of my ministry. It was crazy, a whole weekend of people and videos and conversations and hoopla. Very, very, very kind, very gracious.
Yeah.
But it's again, I think it was the hardest thing was the fact that after I retired from the church, I didn't move. I was still here in the community, running into people, go out to eat with friends, and there were some things that would happen that normally I would be there, for, and I think that was tough on the people. It's like, why can't he be here, And so we laid that clearly on the conference's feet. We just simply said the conference has asked me not to be here for a year, and I will honor that request.
Yeah.
They don't know. The people, the congregation didn't know I had a year's severance. They didn't know anything about any of that. That was all much behind the scenes.
Now, one of the things which we read as we were doing our literature review was that, and you describe yourself as a CEO, is that CEOs are critical in good succession moments, and that successions are opportunities to sharpen your strategy for future growth. So I don't know if you're aware of how things have gone. You said you'd give Ken, your successor, an A+, but has there been continued growth, or has there been people who just have left and since then?
Yes, yes to both. There has been some good growth. It's been really tough because Ken came June of 21. So you had reoccurring pandemic issues. You had back to masks, and it just was really hard because we just came back to meeting in the church not long before I left.
Wow.
I mean, at my retirement weekend, we had to limit who could come to the church because of seating arrangements to keep distance between people, and everybody was masked, and we arranged chairs differently, and so it was just awkward. And so he had to start in a very awkward time from that standpoint. I've been very pleased. I have not attended second service, which is usually the little higher attendance. I've been attending first service, and I've been very pleased with the attendance, the comeback attendance. It's been very, very encouraging. We're not back to where we were, but I don't think it would have made. I think if I was there, we wouldn't be back to where we were. I don't think it's a Ken issue. I think it's a pandemic issue.
Yes.
But when I go there, I see lots of new faces, people I've never seen before. I'm like, yeah, cool. Who are these people? And I'm trying to meet them and that kind of thing. So that's encouraging.
Let me ask one more question, then Nate, maybe you might have another question as well, and then we'll wrap up. One of the other things which we read and I thought was interesting is that CEOs who have highly generative mindsets help companies transition well. And when they talk about generativity, they're talking about leaders who help to develop the next generation of leaders and create room for them. And with your successor, I believe that he is, in his late 30s or early 40s. So was that an intentional commitment you had to be able to help a next generation pastor come in after you?
Well, and it's terribly irritating for me to think about a 45-year-old as the next generation, but I'm only 45 anyway. No, very much intentional. In fact, I push the search committee and push the board every time they talk about people or suggest names as they began to actually, get responses from the search team that was doing the work, the consultants. I would always simply say, can we go younger? Can we go younger? Can we go younger? I was 29 years old when I became senior pastor of this church.
Yeah.
And I would love to have seen us be in the very early 30s, maybe at the oldest. That wasn't going to happen. The conference would not allow that to happen. They said we can't have a church of this significance without a seasoned person coming in. And so I couldn't go as young as I would have liked. I think it's hard to go too young as well. One of the things, when we did natural church development at one point, and there's one of the slats on the, I don't know if you're familiar with that. There's like the slats of a barrel, and you look at what your lowest slat is, so you can increase it and make it where you can hold more in your bucket. Anyway, basically we scored very high. I forget what it was called. I didn't recognize it. Anyway, what it was enabling other people to act, letting people have a go at something. I didn't realize we were even doing it, but we very rarely as a church said no to anything. We are very much a yes and improvish church. Innovation was important. So a person comes to me and they would say, let's do X, Y, Z. And we would say, well, okay, do you have anybody can do it with you? We don't want you to go alone. And what kind of budget do you need? We can throw some money at this. And we let people try just about anything. And very rarely said no. Very much an enabling of, especially if it's a young person's idea, let it roll for sure.
That's
Thank
cool.
you.
That's really good. So, and the pastor that came in, you mentioned his name. What was that again?
His name is Ken Wetmore.
Okay. So with Pastor Ken, how did the ministry support him on incoming? Something that you mentioned was that transition period would have really helped him to know the culture and become more ingrained in the culture coming in. Something that you have mentioned was you guys really helped define, these are the things that we are and we don't want to lose sight of or don't want to lose in this transition, which I believe helps the incoming pastors know what they're getting into or what they're agreeing to. What are maybe some other ways that the ministry helped support him to assimilate and know what he was getting into before taking on the position, or maybe early in the position, even in the first couple months?
Well, the document that we put together that talked about who we are was critical in his understanding of who we are. He is still, after a year, I think, in a little bit of a state of shock at how good he's got it.
Hey, he said something to that effect to me. Yes.
Yeah. Well, and I can completely imagine he probably read over this document and was like, yeah, sure.
Yeah, that's what they say they are.
Yeah. And then it comes to, actually meeting, getting boots on the ground and realizing, okay, so this does line up. So, yeah.
The staff was very critical, I think, in giving him strong support as he came. We talked about that there's only one of any of us, and so don't expect this person to be that person. but at the same time, you've got to get to know this person. You got to be supportive of this person. We had those conversations. You got to be there for each other and help him understand what home is now.
Yeah.
And I think the staff did a great job in helping manage that. The administrative pastor very much, I think, help even challenge some of his conversations and thinking about things, saying, well, that may be how they do it some places, but it's not how we do it here, kind of thing. Because of these reasons, not being arbitrary or hard-nosed about it, but just saying that we have a different kind of history here. And I think that was really helpful for Ken, probably. We didn't talk as much once he got here as we did before he got here, and then we've occasionally talked since then. but like church retreat for our church is a big deal. Back in the pre-pandemic, we had 600 people at our church retreat.
Wow.
And it's and so when church retreat was coming this year, they said that's when I was coming. I was coming back. Now that's my year of exile was over. He called me and said, "Hey, would you be willing to be part of one of our skits on Saturday night? Want to poke some fun at you?" And they rewrote the Disney song about nobody talks about Bruno.
Yeah.
Nobody talks about Andy. I helped shoot some videos with him. And so I wanted him to understand clearly that I'm here to support him, not challenge him. I'm not looking to come back and take leadership. I just want to make sure he does a good job. And people don't realize this part of the transition after a long-term ministry is it's like your child has finished college and done their doctoral work and done postdoctoral work, and now you're gonna leave them and go away, and they've got to move on, kind of thing. And so people would, are you gonna do this? I don't want to do anything that in any way damages that congregation. I have a high degree of, like, most of my life invested there. So I'm very much interested in Ken's success and the church's success. And so that's really important to me.
Wow. Well, Andy, thank you so very much for your time. You have given us a whole lot of firsthand information of what sounds like a very successful transition. We look forward to talking with Ken on the other side, so we can complete the circle and see what his experience has been like in transitioning into WholeLife Church.